Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask the Cricketer. After day three, second test, New Zealand, England. England win handsomely. Cameron Ponsonby is our man in Wellington. Great view you've got there, Cameron. Windy as ever. Windy as ever. I would expect. I just want to confront one issue before we get into it. I was accused
Yeah.
in at least one comment yesterday of being bored during some of your answers. And I just
So was I.
I want to just absolutely clarify, once and all, just set the record straight that that was absolutely accurate. So really, the pressure is
Yeah,
on you
nice.
to
Good.
keep me entertained, to keep if I can't say I'm too bothered, but certainly to keep our viewers entertained as well during the next quarter of an hour. Um, what sort of day have you had today? Presumably slightly better than yesterday. But what sort of day have you had? How have you kind of embraced it?
Weird. It's been a weird day because the wind. I know it's called the Windy City, so I mean, you can't be surprised it's windy, but it's really windy. And so currently, you might be able to see a change of viewpoint. I'm in like the commentary gantry, and it's just started smashing down with rain. As I've said that, and it's kind of shaking, and it did play a bit of a role in the game. You saw Gus Atkinson and Sherbashir having to pull out of their kind of run ups, but really, like it was strange in that when have you ever watched a cricket match where a team's 580 runs ahead? And so kind of England declare earlier than they need to because there's still over 2.5 days left in the test match. But shock horror, 580 runs seemed to be enough. Yeah, it was a day where you kind of waited for the end and had to pick apart the kind of individual storylines as opposed to learning anything kind of mega and macro about either team.
I swear I can't remember the last time I went to a test match and it didn't rain as soon as the match was finished. Like I swear every
That's a good
time
point, yeah.
you go, it's so weird, isn't it? It's like you wait for the weather, you wait for the weather, you wait for the weather, and then just turn the taps on as soon as we get a result.
No, and well, I mean, it could rain for as much. It could rain for much of the next 2 days, and England would have been fine. I kind of forgot that they even batted this morning when Joe Root brought up his 36th Test century because it just felt like a bowling day, and then it ended up feeling like a Blundell versus Bashir afternoon, and it just re-highlighted how brittle this New Zealand team is. Really, three of their top six in Latham, Conway, and Blundell averaged less than 25 in their last 15 Test matches, I think it is. And they once again were 30 for three with kind of coming up against England. Can't speak. And yeah, it's been weird. I don't know where England's true mean lies because yes, they've been excellent. Yes, there are strong, like absolute positives to come out of this in terms of Carson, Atkinson, and Bethel. But New Zealand have been so poor that it's not a great indicator of whether this is an all kind of conquering England team or actually they're just kind of going through their motions at a high standard that are too high for a New Zealand team that are a bit of out of sync at the moment.
Yeah. So how just sort of building on that, how do we kind of frame this from an England perspective? They've rebounded from Pakistan, which was pretty chastening. Let's not
Yeah,
forget. If not certainly because of the way that Pakistan won those two tests, but as much because of the way England had won the first one, right? And they picked virtually exactly the same squad for this series, which they didn't necessarily need to, but they basically throw their weight behind the same group again. And as you say, like New Zealand have been pretty poor, a lot worse than we thought they would be, given what happened in India. So how do we frame this given all of that?
good. Overall, good for sure. Because I think although it's hard to gauge where the team necessarily is, you've learned things about each individual aspect of the side. So in
Mm.
Carson Atkinson, big green tick, fantastic. You've got two bowlers you can build an attack around and shape it how you want. Kind of Jacob Bethel being added into the mix, big tick. Whether he ends up batting at three over the summer or not, the worst case scenario is that England now have Jacob Bethel as their reserve batter. Fantastic. It just deepens that kind of batting strength. Question mark, Zach Crawley. He's failed again against New Zealand, but even he has that kind of wealth of and that well of he can draw back to of I have performed well against India, I have performed well against Australia. That's where there's kind of a
Mm.
little question mark rising. And I thought today it feels harsh to pick out a difficult day for someone to then be the moment where you go, oh, actually, how's Shoaib Bashir going? But Shoaib Bashir had a really, really tough day today, bowling to Tom Blundell and kind of being relentlessly hit for 6. And that is all part of this kind of build up towards the Ashes, which he's kind of been like groomed for, to be like, this, you're going to be our guy over here. But on a day where it was a low pressure situation, he had 600 runs to play with. The same is true on the other foot. So the New Zealand batters are basically batting without pressure, and they really took apart Bashir. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. It'll be a chastening day for him, but hey, he literally, we know he's here to be learning. We know there's going to be kind of bad days to go along with the good days, and it's just that this was one of the formers.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one with Bashir, isn't it? And I've said this on these videos before, like, on the one hand, he's really young and inexperienced, and on the other hand, he's really young and inexperienced.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes both ways. Like, regardless of how he plays, it's quite easy and quite valid also to go sort of return to that and go, like, this guy is literally learning on the job in the most intense environment. Okay, maybe not today, but the most intense environment available. One thing that definitely worries me, and you alluded to this, is that he does seem to be. It does see teams go after him. Pakistan went after him, and New Zealand have gone after him again. And I would really have concerns about how Australia will approach him, if indeed he is the first choice spinner in a year or so. Sorry, I went there. I threw forward, but ultimately that would slightly concern me as well.
I think teams know he's going to be attacked, and also England know he's going to be kind of targeted, because if you can get into him, you then kind of run down the seamers and get them more tired. That's the kind of staple tactic for every team across the world. I think what Stokes was probably doing with him today is kind of being like, it doesn't matter, keep bowling your best stock ball. Like, the way you get people out if they're trying to slog you in effect and you're not getting loads of spin is to have that dip on the ball, to have that action on the ball, which means the length is slightly different to the batter that they expect. It comes off a slightly different part of the bat when they're striking the ball. That catches the toe end or a bit too high and you're course at long on. I think what England will really want from Bashir in terms of his development is to make sure when he does miss, and of course he'll miss, he's a bowler, he's a human, he's learning on the job, is to miss in kind of the same direction. Because at the moment what's been happening is he misses kind of full, kind of wide, and then he misses kind of short, straight. He has this straight short miss where he then gets kind of swivel pulled, and it came out a couple of times in Christchurch. And you just, from England's point of view and from Bashir's, you just want to narrow that down a little bit to be like, okay, we all know that we're going to make a mistake, but where is our mistake? And then we can protect against that. At the moment, he has 3 misses in 3 different directions, which makes that very difficult. But again, like, the reason why England want to invest in him so much is because of the ball he bowled to Glenn Phillips today, which, yes, it stayed a bit low, but part of the reason Glenn Phillips has gone back to that delivery is because it's come from Shoaib Bashir, because of his height, because of the bounce he typically gets. It's a length where he goes, I'm going to head back here. Actually, it stays a bit low, clean bowls him. Bashir has bowled fantastically well for England on a number of occasions. His spell in Ranchi, on his debut tour, where he bowled throughout the afternoon session, was incredibly impressive and deserves to give him a lot of credit in the bank in terms of that is the stealing, to use England's parlance, that this kid can perform to. His delivery to Jason Holder over the summer showed like the one ball ability that he has to potentially bowl such a fantastic off break. There are so many reasons to invest in him. It's just that he's having a slightly difficult time of it right now across this winter. And yeah, and that's it. That's all it is, really. He's having a difficult time. He's being targeted, but England will have expected this. There's no world where Bashir was going to start playing for England and just go up and up and up and up. That's not part of the deal. Part of the deal was, okay, he's learning on the job. Part of learning on the job is learning how to deal with the bad days and learning how to deal with players attacking you or targeting you. He's not going to be dropped anytime soon, and nor should he be. But I think today was a reminder that England are kind of doing a development workshop whilst playing elite sport, and that's fine. Like, Bashir's, by all accounts, the nicest, greatest guy in the world. Wish him absolutely all the best, and today was just a difficult day.
Yeah, very entertaining. I think that in terms of the reason why Bashir came on, I guess, was because of how tricky it was for the seamers to bowl like that, and also I guess also because the wind will have assisted him a little bit in terms of flight and stuff. Can you just give us a sort of capture an insight for us in terms of what it actually is like there? In terms of we've got some pretty battering conditions in the UK, but we're not playing cricket here. What can you give us a flavour as to what it's actually like out there for everyone?
So I think the best way I can describe it is there's a couple of domestic players for Wellington I've spoken to in the past, and they kind of need reminding that this is one of the most beautiful grounds in the world, because they go, when the wind picks up, it is horrible. It is a horrible place to play because it's so exposed. You're in the middle of this roundabout. The wind buffets in every single direction. And you could see today, you had people like Gus Atkinson, picked because he could bowl north of 90 miles an hour, bowling at 76 because his body is just like, what on earth is happening here? I don't know how to adapt to this kind of level of difficulty that's just been imposed on my game today. I'm currently, as I referred to, stood up in the camera gantry, the commentary gantry, and it's shaking. I hate it, and it's making me feel quite ill. I don't like it at all. But it's the most cover you can get. It's called the Windy City for a reason, and it's really, really windy, and it makes life very, very, very difficult for the guys playing out there.
Well, we're paying you substandardly to be in this compromised position. So remain there for just a couple more minutes before we go. Let's try and throw forward to Hamilton in a couple of days, or well, no, actually a few couple of days, nearly a week now, until that third test, which is essentially now sort of a bit of a dead rubber. It sounds like New Zealand are going to keep faith with Tim Southee, and what they're going to do with the rest of the 11, I'm not too sure at this point. How do you kind of think that both teams will look for, as far as their 11s is concerned, for that game?
I think for England, the only swap they'd be tempted to make is maybe give Potts a game, but in place of whoever you want, really. You could go Wokes, but on the flip side, Wokes is doing quite well overseas for the first time. You could keep him going, make sure he has some confidence. If, lo and behold, you do end up wanting to take him to Australia. Atkinson and Carter played a lot of cricket over the last month or so. You could pick either of them. Bashir will definitely play. Pope will definitely keep at 6. Beth will be at 3. Brooke was off the pitch today with a sore knee or ankle, so just one to keep an eye on there in case England want to be super careful and rest him. Ben Stokes has done a lot of press conferences. He may have already said he's A-OK, he's fine to play, but he was off the pitch today with a sore something. So just something to be aware of. New Zealand had the opportunity to rotate for this match. The one kind of, unfortunately, weak spot in their bowling attack is Tim Southee at the moment. They could have said, hey, Tim, 3 tests in a row is a lot. Why don't you sit out at the Basin and come back for your farewell in Hamilton at Seddon Park? They haven't done that, and they're now going to kind of have to drag him there unless something remarkable happens and he decides to stop now, which, I mean, would be really sad, and I kind of hope he doesn't do that from a personal level. Their batting is pretty brittle at the moment. They've got Will Young sat on the bench, but Will Young is this kind of, I don't know, red herring isn't the right way of describing it. He's kind of, because he got Player of the Series in India, it's like, well, why isn't he playing? Well, he's played quite a lot in New Zealand and not performed particularly well. I think he's got about 9 test matches in New Zealand with an average of like 22. Both those numbers could be wrong by a little bit. Opening the batting. So it's not a case of you're going to swap him in for Conway and everything's going to be solved. Blundell had been a previous kind of potential for change, but he's just scored a century. So I don't know. New Zealand are typically quite kind of conservative in their selections, and they also only have 1 test match until a massive break. They've only got 4 scheduled for next year. They have 2 away to Zimbabwe and 2 at home to the West Indies. There's a chance that they might add a couple in against South Africa, but that's so far from being confirmed, it might not happen at all. Yeah, they've got 3 changes they could make. They could equally end up making 0 and just saying, let's just ride this wave and get to next year and kind of have another think. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the option they plug for.
The Southee thing is so weird, and I really, really hate pre-series retirements or pre-test retirements, really, because they hamstrung selection. It's almost impossible to drop him for the 3rd test, right? Well, it is impossible to drop him for the 3rd test unless he falls off a bus. There's no real opportunity. There's no window there to actually do that, and you enshrine your place in the team, and you also I know New Zealand haven't got a decked schedule for next year, so you can kind of perhaps make an argument that it doesn't massively matter who plays in that third test. But also, like, succession planning, there's one fewer test that you can look at who you're
Yeah,
gonna look
for
at for the
sure.
future. It's so weird, and now he's clearly performing. He's one of the weak elements of the attack. We've talked about how impressive some of the other components of it have been. Like puts New Zealand in a real predicament, a real problem, and there's literally no way out of it. They're going to have to play unless Tom Latham he's going to get lynched otherwise, isn't he?
Well, yeah, and Latham did say afterwards, um, well, we'll let the dust settle. We'll think about the team selection like in a few days now. Now's not the time, but obviously it'll be Tim's last game, and you're like, okay, so
Yeah,
he is playing, sweet. And it's rubbish, isn't it? Because we're talking about this, we're talking about, oh, how sad is it that Tim Southee's going out like this, rather than being like, wow, what a career Tim Southee had. That's so frustrating and annoying. I can completely understand the idea of like being like, oh, hey, I'm going to stop at this point, just kind of to let people know. But then the problem comes where you're on such a downward ebb that you are hindering your team at the moment, and that's kind of what's happening. Like his average for the year is in the 60s. I don't think he's taken more than 2 wickets in a match in his last 12 appearances. He's not performing at the level he knows he used to, and he's aware of that. That's why the Test captaincy was kind of moved on from him, or he gave up the Test captaincy. That's part of the reason why he's retiring, obviously. He's aware of all this, and it must be kind of deeply frustrating from his own point of view, where he's like, it's not brilliant how this is kind of all coming to an end, but there'll be one Test match left to kind of get through it, and then someone like Ben Sears, who's currently injured, would probably be the likely person to take on the new generation.